never belonged among them. That much was clear from the first winter moon when my bones refused to break, my skin failed to stretch, and my human heart pounded defiantly against the transformation. The bitter pine scent of disappointment clung to my parents as they realized their daughter, their only child, would never run with the pack. The claiming ceremony wasn't meant for people like me. Yet here I stood on the outer edge of the ancient clearing, autumn leaves crunching beneath my worn boots, my breath forming small clouds in the crisp October air. Dozens of powerful shifters had gathered in concentric circles, their bodies thrumming with barely contained energy. The forest around us vibrated with their collective power, an energy I could sense but never channel. "Move aside, Omega." The voice belonged to Eliza, beta female and daughter of our pack's second-in-command. Her golden eyes flashed with disdain as she pushed past me, her shoulder deliberately striking mine. I stumbled backward, my blonde hair falling across my face as I tried to maintain balance. That's what they called me, Omega, the lowest rank, the unchanging one, the human burden in a world of wolves. My fingers instinctively reached for the small stone pendant hanging around my neck, smooth river quartz, wrapped in delicate silver wire. My grandmother's final gift before she died. "When the world pushes you down, stand with quiet dignity," she'd whispered, placing the necklace in my palm on her deathbed 3 years ago. True strength isn't always about showing teeth. Grandmother had been human too. Married into the pack before such unions became rare. She alone had taught me to find worth in my unchanging form, when everyone else saw only weakness. The ceremonial drums began, pulling me from my memories. Elder wolves moved to the center of the clearing, their aged faces solemn in the fading light. Behind them stood our current alpha, Gregory Stone, his once powerful frame now stooped with age. The whispers had grown louder over the past months. Our pack needed new leadership, stronger blood, someone to protect us from the increasing threats that prowled our borders. I pressed myself against the trunk of an ancient oak, hoping to disappear into its shadows. This ceremony wasn't for me to participate in, only to witness. Tonight, eligible wolves from our pack and visiting allies would present themselves, hoping to be recognized by potential mates. Some said the most powerful matches were blessed by the moon itself, though such unions had grown increasingly rare in recent generations. My best friend Nora appeared beside me, her kind eyes finding mine in the gathering darkness. "You didn't have to come, Eden," she whispered, using my real name instead of the rank everyone else assigned me. "No one would have noticed your absence." "I know," I replied, tugging my worn jacket tighter around my shoulders. "But I'm tired of hiding." Nora's expression softened. Unlike the others, she never made me feel less for being human. Her own status as a healer granted her respect despite her gentle nature, a luxury my existence had never afforded me. "Just stay near me," she murmured. "The northern packs have arrived and they're different, more traditional." I nodded, though we both knew there was no protection from the stares and whispers that followed me everywhere within packlands. My presence at such a sacred ceremony would be seen as presumptuous at best, sacrilegious at worst. The drumbeats intensified as the full moon rose higher, its silver light spilling through the canopy and illuminating the clearing with an ethereal glow. One by one, wolves stepped forward, some shifting forms in impressive displays of power, others demonstrating skills or presenting tokens to those who caught their interest. I watched with a familiar ache blooming in my chest, not jealousy, exactly, but a bone-deep longing for belonging that never fully subsided. These rituals were as much a part of my upbringing as they were foreign to my nature. A sudden hush fell over the gathering. The hair on my arms rose despite the absence of any breeze. Something had changed in the atmosphere, a tension that hadn't been there moments before. "They're here," Nora breathed, her body tensing beside mine. I followed her gaze to the northern edge of the clearing where the forest seemed to part of its own accord. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, their presence commanding immediate attention without a single word spoken. Even I, with my human senses, could feel the power emanating from them. These were not ordinary wolves. The central figure stood taller than any man I'd ever seen, broad-shouldered and still as stone. his face obscured by the play of moonlight and shadow. Flanking him were two equally imposing men, their postures making it clear they served as protectors rather than equals. "The Shadow Mountain Alpha," someone whispered nearby. "They say he united 5 warring packs through force alone." "I heard he's never taken a mate," another voice added. "Turned down daughters from every powerful bloodline." Elderstone stepped forward, bowing his head in deference. "Alpha Blackthorn, we welcome you to Moon River territory. We are honored by your presence at our claiming ceremony." The newcomer inclined his head slightly, and even that small gesture carried unmistakable authority. When he spoke, his voice resonated through the clearing like distant thunder. "The honor is mine, Elder. Your invitation was unexpected." Something in his tone suggested more than mere formality. There was history between these packs, politics I wasn't privy to. I found myself leaning forward slightly, straining to see his face as he moved into the moonlight. When he stepped fully into the clearing, a collective intake of breath swept through the gathering. He wasn't just powerful, he was striking. Raven black hair swept back from a face carved with uncompromising lines, eyes that gleamed like polished steel in the moonlight, and the fluid way he moved suggested barely restrained power. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to jawline, somehow enhancing rather than diminishing his commanding presence. This was Alaric Blackthorn, the alpha who had become legend even among wolves. "We begin with the traditional offerings," Elderstone announced, his voice steady despite the palpable tension. "Those who seek partnership may present themselves." Young wolves from our pack stepped forward, some confident, others visibly intimidated by the presence of such a powerful alpha and his guards. One by one, they displayed their strengths, shifting with impressive speed, demonstrating combat skills or showcasing special abilities valued among our kind. I watched, transfixed despite myself, as the ritual unfolded. The foreign alpha observed each demonstration with inscrutable expression, neither impressed nor dismissive. "This is ridiculous," Eliza hissed to her circle of friends nearby. "As if any of them stand a chance. Everyone knows he's here to assess Gregory's successor, not find a mate." Her words carried in the night air, and I wasn't the only one who heard them. Alpha Blackthorn's head turned slightly, his steel gaze sweeping over the crowd until it paused in our direction. Though I couldn't be certain he'd pinpointed Eliza as the speaker, something about his focused attention made me shrink further into the shadows. The ceremony continued as visiting wolves presented themselves. The displays grew increasingly impressive, feats of strength and skill that left spectators murmuring in appreciation. Through it all, Alpha Blackthorn remained impassive, occasionally exchanging quiet words with his guards. As the night deepened, the ceremonial fire at the center of the clearing burned lower. The formal presentations were coming to an end, and I felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. Soon I could return to my small cabin at the edge of pack territory, away from judging eyes and the painful reminder of what I could never be. Just as Elderstone stepped forward to begin the closing rites, a commotion erupted from the eastern side of the clearing. A group of young males from a neighboring pack, wolves I recognized from previous gatherings, pushed their way to the front, dragging something between them. My heart stopped when I realized it was a person, a young woman from our pack named Lily. Like me, she carried no wolf blood, having married into the pack just last spring. Her face was streaked with tears, her clothes dirty as if she'd been thrown to the ground. "We found this human trespassing near our borders," announced a tall wolf with cruel eyes. "Carrying these." He threw a small satchel at Elderstone's feet. Even from my position, I recognized the distinctive leaves and berries that spilled out. Wolfsbane, a plant deadly to shifters. Gasps and growls rippled through the gathering. Possession of wolfsbane was forbidden in pack territories, considered an act of aggression, or worse, preparation for murder. Lily's protest was cut short by a rough shake from her captor. "She claimed she was gathering herbs for healing," he continued, voice dripping with contempt. "But we all know what humans really think of us." My body moved before my mind could catch up. I pushed forward through the crowd, ignoring the startled looks and murmurs of disapproval. "She's telling the truth," I called out, my voice sounding thin in the large clearing. "She works with our healer." All eyes turned to me. Dozens of predators suddenly focused on prey, foolish enough to draw attention to itself. The silence that followed, seemed to stretch into eternity. Then the wolf holding Lily laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. Another human defender. Your pack has become soft, Elderstone, harboring these weaklings. I should have looked down, stepped back, disappeared again into the shadows. That's what was expected of an Omega. Submission, especially when confronted by dominant wolves from another pack. But my grandmother's pendant felt suddenly warm against my skin. Stand with quiet dignity, I lifted my chin and met his gaze directly. Lily is under Moon River protection. She's pack. The words hung in the air like a challenge. I was acutely aware of how absurd it must seem. The lowest-ranked member attempting to speak for the entire pack, but I couldn't stay silent, not when Lily's terrified eyes locked with mine. Silently pleading for help, the wolf's eyes narrowed dangerously. He released Lily with a shove that sent her sprawling to the ground and took a deliberate step in my direction. You smell of fear, little human, he said, inhaling deeply. As you should. Do you know what happens to your kind who interfere in wolf business? Every instinct screamed for me to retreat, to apologize, to abase myself before his obvious power. Instead, I remained rooted to the spot, my grandmother's words echoing in my mind. I might not have claws or fangs, but I had something these bullies would never understand. Compassion that transcended fear. That's enough, Darius, Elderstone's voice cut through the tension. The human girl is correct. Lily is under our protection. The wolf, Darius, turned with a snarl. Your protection means nothing if you cannot enforce it, old man. Your pack grows weaker by the season, taking in strays and humans. His gaze swept dismissively over me. Soon there will be nothing left of true wolf blood in Moon River lands. Before Elderstone could respond, another voice spoke, deeper, colder than the autumn night around us. Interesting. Alpha Blackthorn stepped forward, his movement so fluid it seemed he simply materialized between Darius and me. I wasn't aware the Red Claw Pack now dictates terms to its allies. Darius paled visibly, immediately dropping his gaze. Alpha Blackthorn, I meant no disrespect to, and yet you disrespect this ceremony, this pack, and its alpha with your actions. The Shadow Mountain leader's words were quiet, but laced with unmistakable authority. Curious how the strongest wolves rarely need to demonstrate their power so clumsily. Without waiting for a response, Alpha Blackthorn turned slightly toward me, and for the first time, I found myself directly under his gaze. Steel-gray eyes assessed me with an intensity that made breathing difficult. I expected to see the usual dismissal, or, worse, pity, but his expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. The Omega speaks truth, he stated, his voice carrying effortlessly across the now silent clearing, and shows courage where others show only teeth. The words, so eerily similar to my grandmother's teaching, sent a shock through me. I stood frozen, unable to look away from his penetrating gaze, feeling as though he were seeing through layers I'd carefully constructed around my heart. Then, something extraordinary happened. Alpha Blackthorn, leader of the most powerful pack in the north, inclined his head toward me, the barest nod of acknowledgement, but unmistakable in its intent. A collective gasp rose from the gathered wolves. No alpha of his standing would show such gesture to an Omega, let alone a human one. Even Elderstone appeared momentarily stunned before regaining his composure. In that moment, as hundreds of eyes darted between the legendary Alpha and me, a strange sensation bloomed in my chest. Not belonging, exactly, but something equally powerful, recognition. And something in the Alpha's steel eyes suggested this night had taken a turn no one had anticipated, least of all me. The remainder of the ceremony passed in a blur of tense formalities. Elderstone hastily concluded the rituals while Lily was escorted to Nora's side. Trembling, but unharmed, I remained rooted to my spot, hyper-aware of every glance thrown my way. Some curious, others hostile. The incident had disrupted the sacred ceremony, and many blamed me for stepping forward rather than the wolves who had dragged Lily into the clearing. Most unsettling of all was the weight of Alpha Blackthorn's occasional gaze. Though he had returned to his position and continued observing the proceedings with apparent detachment, I could feel when his attention shifted to me. A prickling awareness that raised the fine hairs on my arms. What were you thinking? Nora whispered, when she finally reached my side, one arm still wrapped protectively around Lily's shoulders, challenging Darius in front of everyone, in front of visiting alphas. I touched my grandmother's pendant, finding it cool against my skin once more. I wasn't thinking. I just couldn't watch them treat her that way. That's exactly the problem. Nora's voice held equal parts exasperation and concern. Eden, the northern wolves aren't like us. They follow the old ways. Women, especially human women, don't speak out in ceremonies. Then perhaps it's time for new ways, I murmured, surprising myself with the boldness of my words. Nora stared at me as if I'd suggested flying to the moon. Before she could respond, a hush fell over the gathering. Elder Stone was speaking again, his voice carrying the formal tones that signaled an important announcement. As is tradition, we extend an invitation to our honored guests to remain in Moon River territory for the coming days. Alpha Blackthorn, the pack house is prepared for you and your guards. The Shadow Mountain Alpha surveyed the clearing once more before inclining his head in acceptance. My thanks, Elder Stone. We will stay until the Hunter's Moon. 7 days. The visiting pack would remain for 7 days, an unusually long visit for an alpha of his standing. Whispers immediately erupted among the gathered wolves. He's definitely here to assess potential successors, someone murmured nearby. Gregory won't last another winter. Or he's finally looking for a mate, another voice countered. Why else would he attend a claiming ceremony after refusing for so many years? I tried to slip away, as the formal gathering dissolved into smaller clusters of conversation, eager to return to my cabin and process the night's events in solitude. Nora caught my arm before I could disappear. Council meeting at first light, she said, her expression serious. Elder Stone wants you there. Me? I blinked in surprise. Why would the council want an Omega present? Nora's eyes flickered to where Alpha Blackthorn stood in conversation with Elder Stone, their expressions grave. I don't know. But after what happened tonight, just be there, Eden. I nodded, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline of the confrontation faded from my system. With a final glance toward the visiting Alpha, who seemed to sense my attention, his head turning slightly in my direction, I slipped away into the darkness of the forest path. The walk to my cabin always felt longer after pack gatherings, the isolation more pronounced. Unlike other pack members who lived in the communal areas, I'd chosen a small dwelling at the territory's edge, close enough to fulfill my obligations, but far enough to avoid daily reminders of my otherness. Moonlight filtered through the forest canopy, illuminating the familiar path with patches of silver. Despite my human limitations, I knew these woods intimately, every root, every stone, every seasonal change. This forest had been my playground as a child, before I understood what my inability to shift meant for my future. The memory of Alpha Blackthorn's penetrating gaze followed me home. His words echoed in my mind. The Omega speaks truth and shows courage where others show only teeth. Had he somehow known about my grandmother's teaching, or was it merely coincidence? Either way, his unexpected support had momentarily altered my position in the pack's complex hierarchy, and I wasn't naive enough to believe the change would be welcomed by all. My cabin appeared through the trees, a simple structure of weathered wood and stone with smoke curling from the chimney. I'd left a small fire burning before departing for the ceremony, and the thought of its warmth quickened my steps. As I approached my door, instinct made me pause. Something felt different. The air carried unfamiliar scents. Wood smoke and pine, yes, but underneath them something wilder, more potent. I scanned the tree line surrounding my small clearing, seeing nothing but shadows and silver-touched foliage. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish even as I did so. If someone lurked in the darkness, announcing my awareness would hardly help. Only night sounds answered, the distant hoot of an owl, leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. After a moment, I shook off the sensation and pushed open my door, stepping into the welcoming warmth of my home. Everything appeared exactly as I'd left it. The fire crackled in the small stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the single room. My bed stood neatly made beneath the window, bookshelves lining the adjacent wall. The table held my unfinished work, herbs bundled for drying, notes on their properties carefully documented. As the pack's only human member with extensive knowledge of plant medicine, I'd carved out a modest role for myself, assisting Nora with remedies that required human handling. I bolted the door and moved to stoke the fire, still unable to shake the feeling of being watched. After adding another log to the flames, I crossed to the window, peering out at the moonlit clearing. Nothing moved except the shadows of branches swaying in the breeze. "You're imagining things," I muttered to myself, drawing the curtains closed. Sleep came fitfully that night. My dreams filled with steel-gray eyes and shadows that moved with predatory grace. I woke before dawn, the pale light of early morning barely penetrating my curtains. The council meeting would begin soon, and I still had no idea why my presence had been requested. I dressed with care, selecting my sturdiest boots and warmest sweater beneath my jacket. Council meetings took place in the open pavilion at the center of pack territory, and autumn mornings in the mountains carried a biting chill. After braiding my long blonde hair and securing it at the nape of my neck, I gathered my satchel of healing herbs, a habit more than necessity, as I doubted my skills would be needed today. The pack was already stirring as I made my way toward the central grounds. Wolves moved with purpose, many nodding respectfully as they passed. I noticed the change immediately. The usual averted gazes or dismissive glances had been replaced by curious assessment. Word of last night's events had clearly spread. The pavilion came into view, an open circular structure supported by columns of river stone. Elder Stone already sat in his ceremonial chair, flanked by his advisors. To my surprise, Alpha Blackthorn and his guards were also present, positioned opposite the Moon River leadership, like opposing forces on a battlefield. Nora waited at the pavilion's edge, her expression tight with worry. She pulled me aside before I could approach the gathering. "They've been discussing territorial boundaries since before dawn," she whispered. "The northern borders have been breached 3 times in the past month, rogue wolves testing our defenses." I frowned. Why wasn't this mentioned at the General Assembly? Elder Stone didn't want to cause panic. Nora glanced toward the council, but Alpha Blackthorn arrived with reports of similar incursions in Shadow Mountain territory. Before I could ask more questions, Elder Stone's voice rang out. "Approach, Eden." Heart pounding, I walked forward into the pavilion. All conversation ceased as I took my position at the center of the circle, feeling the weight of evaluation from every direction. I kept my gaze respectfully lowered, though I could feel Alpha Blackthorn's presence like a physical force to my right. "You witnessed the confrontation with the Red Claw wolves last night," Elder Stone began without preamble. "Tell us exactly what you observed." I recounted the events as clearly as possible. Lily being dragged into the clearing, the accusation about wolfsbane, my intervention. Throughout my account, I kept my voice steady, focusing on facts rather than emotions. When I finished, Elder Stone exchanged glances with his second-in-command. "And you believe Lily was gathering these herbs for medicinal purposes?" "Yes," I replied firmly. "She's been assisting Nora with burn treatments for the young ones who are learning to control their first shifts. Some of the plants in her satchel can be combined with wolfsbane in minute quantities to create a salve that soothes heat damage to the skin." A low murmur ran through the council. I risked a glance at Alpha Blackthorn, finding his expression unreadable as he studied me. "The timing is suspicious," said Marcus, the Moon River Pack's head of security. 3 border breaches, and now a human found with wolfsbane near Red Claw territory. "Lily wouldn't," I began, then stopped myself. It wasn't my place to interrupt council discussions. To my surprise, Alpha Blackthorn spoke. "The Omega wishes to speak. I, for one, would hear her thoughts." All eyes turned to me, and I swallowed hard. Lily wouldn't knowingly endanger the pack. She loves her husband and has been accepted by most here, but she's still learning our ways. I hesitated, then added, "She may not have realized how close she'd come to the border, or how her actions might be interpreted." "Or perhaps," came a new voice, smooth and dangerous, "she was precisely where she intended to be." Darius stepped into the pavilion, flanked by 2 Red Claw wolves. His presence sent a ripple of tension through the gathering. Elder Stone rose from his chair. "This is a closed council meeting, Darius." "Yet it concerns Red Claw interests." Darius's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Especially when humans in your territory carry weapons against our kind." "Herbs for healing aren't weapons," I said, before I could stop myself. Darius's gaze slid to me, contempt evident in every line of his face. "The human defends her own kind. How predictable. The human, Alpha Blackthorn interjected coldly, appears to be the only one speaking with logic rather than prejudice. He rose to his full height, the movement drawing all attention. Tell me, Darius, why would a lone human woman seeking to harm wolves venture so close to your sentries? Would it not be more effective to conceal such intentions? Darius's confidence faltered momentarily. Humans lack our intelligence. They make mistakes. Indeed they do, Alpha Blackthorn agreed, his tone deceptively mild. As do wolves who make accusations without evidence. His gaze swept the gathering. The true question is why Red Claw patrols have extended beyond their assigned boundaries 3 times in recent weeks. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Darius's face darkened with barely suppressed anger. Our patrols follow the boundaries established in the last summit, he insisted. Perhaps Moon River's markers have shifted. The implication that our pack would tamper with territorial boundaries, a serious violation of wolf law, caused growls to ripple through the Moon River Council. Elderstone raised a hand for silence. These accusations help no one. If there is confusion about boundaries, it will be addressed at the Winter Summit. 2 months is a long time to wait while territories are violated, Alpha Blackthorn observed, his gaze still fixed on Darius. Perhaps a more immediate solution is required. Something in his tone made Darius take an involuntary step backward. We respect the ancient laws, Alpha Blackthorn. Red Claw has no quarrel with Shadow Mountain. Yet you seem eager to create quarrel with Moon River, my ally. Alpha Blackthorn's statement silenced further protest. He turned to Elder Stone. I propose joint patrols along the disputed borders until the summit. Shadow Mountain and Moon River together. The suggestion caused a stir among both councils. Joint patrols were rare, typically only formed in times of significant threat. That Alpha Blackthorn would commit his elite forces to such an arrangement spoke volumes about both his concern and his respect for the Moon River Alliance. Elderstone appeared momentarily taken aback before nodding slowly. We accept with gratitude, Alpha Blackthorn. Darius's expression had soured further. Red Claw will view any encroachment on our hunting grounds as an act of aggression. Then I suggest your pack stay well within its actual boundaries, Alpha Blackthorn replied evenly. And return to those boundaries now. This council meeting no longer concerns you. The dismissal was unmistakable. For a moment, Darius looked as though he might challenge it, a potentially fatal mistake when facing an Alpha of Blackthorn's standing. Instead, he inclined his head stiffly and departed with his companions, tension visible in every line of his body. Once they were gone, Elderstone sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of his advanced years. Thank you for your support, Alpha Blackthorn. The Shadow Mountain leader nodded slightly before his gaze returned to me. I'd remained silent throughout the exchange, aware that I'd already spoken more than was appropriate for my rank. The human knows these borders well? He asked, addressing Elderstone but keeping his eyes on me. Eden has gathered herbs throughout our territory since childhood, Elderstone confirmed. She knows every ridge and valley, particularly the areas where medicinal plants grow. Alpha Blackthorn seemed to consider this information. Then she will join the first patrol. The statement, not a request, sent a jolt of shock through me. Humans didn't participate in border patrols. Ever. Such duties were reserved for the strongest fighters, wolves capable of defending territory if challenged. I began. But Elderstone's warning look silenced me. Eden's talents lie in healing, not patrolling, he said carefully. Perhaps one of our experienced scouts would better serve. The patrol needs someone who can identify wolfsbane and other plants that might be gathered for legitimate purposes, Alpha Blackthorn cut in, unless you have another pack member with such knowledge. The question was rhetorical. While Nora knew many healing plants, her knowledge of their growing locations wasn't as extensive as mine. More importantly, she was needed in the pack grounds to tend to the coming winter ailments. Elderstone hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Very well. Eden will accompany the first patrol at moonrise. And just like that, my fate was decided. I would join wolves from 2 powerful packs to patrol a disputed border where tensions were already high. As the council meeting concluded and wolves dispersed to their duties, Nora hurried to my side, her expression a mixture of concern and disbelief. "This is unprecedented," she whispered. "A human on border patrol, with Shadow Mountain wolves, no less." "I don't understand why he requested me specifically," I murmured, watching Alpha Blackthorn's retreating form as he strode from the pavilion, power evident in every movement. Nora gave me a look that suggested I was being obtuse. "Don't you?" "Eden, he defended you publicly at the claiming ceremony. Now he's elevated your position by assigning you to his personal patrol." She lowered her voice further. "The pack is talking. They say he's interested in you." "That's absurd," I replied automatically, even as my heart skipped a beat. "He's an alpha from the most powerful pack in the north. I'm a human omega." "Nevertheless," Nora said, glancing over my shoulder, "you might want to prepare for tonight carefully. Something tells me this patrol is about more than just identifying plants." I turned to follow her gaze and found Alpha Blackthorn standing at the edge of the clearing, his steel eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. Instead, he held my gaze for a long moment before inclining his head, that same slight acknowledgement he'd offered in the clearing. Then he was gone, disappearing into the forest with predatory grace, leaving me with the unsettling certainty that tonight's patrol would change everything I thought I knew about my place in the wolf world. The hours before moonrise passed with excruciating slowness. I spent the afternoon in my cabin, ostensibly preparing for the patrol, but mostly pacing, my thoughts circling like trapped birds. What did Alpha Blackthorn want from me? Why insist on my presence for a task traditionally reserved for the strongest wolves? I packed and repacked my satchel, ensuring I had identification guides for the border plants, basic healing supplies, and a small knife, more useful for cutting herbs than protection, but its weight at my hip provided some comfort. As the shadows lengthened outside my window, I changed into sturdy, dark clothing suitable for moving through the forest at night. The pendant at my throat seemed heavier somehow, a tangible connection to my grandmother's wisdom. What would she advise if she were here? Probably to observe more than I spoke, to remain dignified regardless of how I was treated. The thought straightened my spine as I braided my hair tightly against my scalp. I might be human, but I wasn't helpless. I knew these forests better than most wolves who rarely ventured beyond their regular hunting grounds. Twilight painted the sky in deepening purples when a sharp knock at my door made me jump. I opened it to find one of Alpha Blackthorn's guards, the taller of the two who had accompanied him to the claiming ceremony. "Alpha Blackthorn requests you join the patrol gathering," he said without preamble. His expression revealed nothing of what he thought about escorting a human to such a meeting. I nodded, gathering my satchel and locking my door before following him through the deepening darkness toward the northern edge of pack territory. We walked in silence, the guard moving with fluid grace while I picked my way more carefully along the uneven ground. Unlike the wolves, I couldn't see perfectly in the gathering darkness. A small clearing at the forest's edge served as the meeting point. 6 wolves already waited, 3 from Moon River, including Marcus, our security chief, and 3 Shadow Mountain wolves. Alpha Blackthorn stood slightly apart, his powerful frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. All eyes turned to me as we approached, expressions ranging from curiosity to poorly concealed disdain. "The human arrives," Marcus commented, his tone making clear what he thought of my inclusion. "We can finally begin." Alpha Blackthorn's gaze swept over me, assessing. "You're prepared for a night in the forest?" "Yes, Alpha," I replied, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. The formal address felt strange on my tongue. I rarely had cause to address Alphas directly. He nodded once. "Our purpose tonight is to verify the eastern boundary where it borders Redclaw territory. We move together, alert for any signs of intrusion." His gaze touched each wolf in turn. "The human is here for her knowledge of the land and its plants. She stays in the center of our formation, protected at all times." Several Moon River wolves exchanged glances. While Elderstone had agreed to my participation, it was clear the pack's fighters hadn't expected such explicit protection orders from the visiting Alpha. Marcus stepped forward. "With respect, Alpha Blackthorn, the human will slow us down. Perhaps she could indicate the relevant areas on a map, and we could—" "If I wanted a map," Alpha Blackthorn cut in, his voice deceptively soft, "I would have requested one. The challenge in his tone was unmistakable. Marcus immediately lowered his eyes, stepping back with a murmured, "Of course, Alpha." With that settled, Alpha Blackthorn gave a brief nod, and the patrol moved out. The wolves arranged themselves in a loose formation with me at the center, exactly as ordered. Alpha Blackthorn took point, moving with silent confidence through the darkening forest. I followed, acutely aware of my human limitations, as branches caught at my clothing and roots threatened to trip my feet. We traveled in silence for nearly an hour, moving steadily eastward toward the disputed boundary. Occasionally, Alpha Blackthorn would pause, scenting the air, before changing our direction slightly. The wolves communicated with subtle gestures and expressions, an unspoken language I could interpret but never fully participate in. The forest grew denser, the terrain more challenging as we approached the border ridge that separated Moon River territory from Red Claw lands. I recognized landmarks I hadn't seen in months, a lightning-struck oak, a peculiarly shaped boulder, and realized we were nearing the area where Lily had been captured. "This is it," I said quietly, gesturing to a small clearing ahead. "This meadow is known for late-blooming medicinal herbs. Lily would have come here for burn remedies." Alpha Blackthorn signaled for the patrol to halt, then moved to my side with soundless grace. "Show me." I stepped into the moonlit meadow, feeling exposed after hours beneath the forest canopy. Small white flowers dotted the clearing. Barely visible in the darkness, I knelt beside a patch, gently touching the delicate petals. "Moon nettle," I explained. "When combined with specific stabilizing herbs, it creates a salve that heals burn wounds without scarring, important for young shifters learning control." Alpha Blackthorn crouched beside me, so close I could feel the unnatural heat radiating from his body, a trait of all wolves, but somehow more intense in his presence. "And the wolfsbane?" he asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I pointed toward the clearing's edge. "It grows near water. There's a small stream just beyond those trees, the natural boundary line." He considered this information, eyes scanning the tree line. So the human woman was exactly where she claimed, gathering healing plants within Moon River territory. "Yes," I confirmed. "The meadow has been part of our lands for generations." Alpha Blackthorn's expression hardened. Yet Red Claw wolves were patrolling here. The implication was clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding about boundaries, but a deliberate incursion. Before I could respond, a low whistle sounded from the forest edge. One of the Shadow Mountain guards appeared, expression grim. "Fresh scents, Alpha. Red Claw. At least 4 wolves, passed through less than an hour ago." Alpha Blackthorn rose to his feet in one fluid motion. "Direction?" "Northwest to southeast." They crossed the stream boundary and continued into Moon River territory. Marcus approached, tension evident in his stance. "This is the 3rd such crossing in as many weeks. They're testing our response times, mapping our patrol patterns, or looking for something specific," Alpha Blackthorn replied, his gaze returning to me. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air ran through me. "You think they're looking for Lily? For humans?" Instead of answering, Alpha Blackthorn turned to his guard. "Perimeter check. Full circle, half-mile radius." The Shadow Mountain wolves moved immediately, melting into the darkness with practiced efficiency. Marcus signaled his Moon River fighters to do the same, leaving me alone with Alpha Blackthorn in the moonlit clearing. The silence stretched between us, neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, simply charged with unasked questions. After a moment, I returned my attention to the medicinal plants, carefully gathering several specimens and placing them in my satchel. "You're not afraid." It wasn't a question, but an observation, his deep voice breaking the silence. I glanced up at him. "I've spent my life among predators, Alpha. Fear becomes familiar." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of what might have been respect. "Yet, you stood against Darius at the ceremony, spoke at the council. Neither action suggests submission to fear." "Some things matter more than fear," I replied simply, rising to my feet. The pendant at my throat caught the moonlight, drawing his attention. "That stone," he said. "It carries significance to you." My fingers touched the smooth quartz automatically. It was my grandmother's, a reminder of her teachings, which are, I hesitated, uncertain why this powerful alpha would care about an old human woman's wisdom. She taught me that strength isn't always visible, that standing with quiet dignity often requires more courage than showing teeth. For a moment, Alpha Blackthorn went very still, his gaze intensifying. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," I agreed softly. "She taught me how to survive in a world where I don't belong." "You believe that?" he asked, stepping closer. "That you don't belong?" The question caught me off guard. No one had ever challenged my acceptance of my place in the pack hierarchy. I was human, an omega by definition. My position was simply fact, not subject to belief or disbelief. Before I could formulate a response, a howl split the night, the signal from our perimeter scouts. Alpha Blackthorn's head snapped toward the sound, his body instantly alert. "Red Claw approaches," he said, voice hardening. "At least 6 wolves moving fast." My heart began to race. "They're coming here? Now?" Without answering, Alpha Blackthorn gripped my arm and pulled me toward the tree line. His touch was firm but carefully measured, as though he were acutely aware of his strength compared to my human fragility. "Stay behind me," he ordered, positioning himself between me and the direction of the approaching wolves. "No matter what happens, do not run. Running triggers hunting instincts." I nodded, struggling to control my breathing as the forest around us seemed to come alive with tension. The Moon River and Shadow Mountain wolves emerged from their patrol positions, forming a protective semicircle facing the eastern boundary. Minutes later, they appeared, Red Claw wolves moving with aggressive confidence through the underbrush. Darius led them, his expression shifting from determination to wariness as he registered the waiting patrol. He hadn't expected resistance, I realized. He'd thought to find the meadow unguarded. "Trespassing on Moon River land," Marcus called out, stepping forward. "Return to your territory, Red Claw." Darius's gaze slid past Marcus to where I stood behind Alpha Blackthorn. A slow smile spread across his face, one that sent ice through my veins. "We track a human criminal," he announced. "The one who carried Wolfsbane. Our Alpha demands justice for this threat to our kind." The woman was cleared of wrongdoing by both Moon River and Shadow Mountain leadership, Alpha Blackthorn replied, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of his rank. "There is no justice to seek here, only boundaries to respect." Darius's eyes narrowed. "You defend humans now, Shadow Alpha? How unexpected." His gaze returned to me. "Especially this one, an Omega, useless to any pack." I felt Alpha Blackthorn tense beside me, the air around him practically vibrating with controlled power. "Return to your territory, Darius. This is your final warning." For a moment, it seemed the Red Claw wolf might challenge him directly, a fatal mistake against an Alpha of Blackthorn's standing. Instead, Darius inclined his head in mock deference. "As you wish. But know this. Red Claw no longer recognizes Moon River's claim to this meadow. Our Alpha will address this at the Winter Summit." His gaze flicked to me one final time. "Keep your humans on a shorter leash until then. Their safety cannot be guaranteed on disputed lands." With that thinly veiled threat hanging in the air, Darius and his wolves retreated, disappearing back across the stream boundary. Only when their sense had faded did the tension in our patrol ease slightly. Marcus approached Alpha Blackthorn, his expression grave. "This goes beyond boundary disputes. They're specifically targeting our human pack members." "Yes," Alpha Blackthorn agreed, his gaze still fixed on the spot where the Red Claw wolves had vanished. "The question is why." The patrol returned to Moon River territory in tight formation, vigilant for any sign of Red Claw wolves. I remained at the center, painfully aware of how my human presence had complicated an already dangerous situation. Alpha Blackthorn stayed close, his powerful form a constant shadow at my side. By the time we reached Packlands, dawn was breaking. Elderstone waited at the main pavilion, his aged face lined with concern as we approached. The patrol leaders provided their report, confirmation of Red Claw's deliberate boundary violations and their targeted interest in human pack members. "This is troubling news," Elderstone said when they finished. "I'll call a full council meeting at midday. Until then, double the patrols on all borders." As the group dispersed, Alpha Blackthorn placed a hand on my shoulder, stopping me. "A moment, Omega. I turned to face him, exhaustion making my movements sluggish. The night's patrol had taken more from me than I wanted to admit. Human endurance had its limits, especially after hours of traversing difficult terrain. "Your knowledge of the territory proved valuable," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You'll join tonight's patrol as well." It wasn't a request. Despite my fatigue, I nodded. "Yes, Alpha." Something flickered in his steel gaze. Perhaps approval, perhaps something else entirely. "Rest now. You'll need your strength." With that, he turned and strode toward the guest quarters where the Shadow Mountain wolves were housed, leaving me to make my way back to my cabin on trembling legs. The early morning light illuminated a pack already buzzing with activity and whispered conversations that ceased abruptly as I passed. News of the confrontation had clearly spread. I had nearly reached the path to my cabin when Eliza stepped into my path, her beautiful face twisted with disdain. "Playing at being important, Omega?" she asked, voice dripping with contempt. "Don't let it go to your head. Alpha Blackthorn uses tools as needed, then discards them." Too exhausted for confrontation, I attempted to step around her. "I'm just doing as ordered, Eliza." She moved to block me again. "You think you're special because he defended you at the ceremony? Because he keeps you close during patrols?" Her laugh was sharp-edged and bitter. "He's using you to provoke Redclaw. Everyone sees it but you." Her words found their mark, reinforcing doubts I'd been trying to suppress. Why would an Alpha of Blackthorn's standing take any interest in a human Omega, unless he had ulterior motives? The kindest interpretation was that he valued my knowledge of local plants. The most cynical was exactly what Eliza suggested. I was being used as bait or provocation. "I need to rest before tonight's patrol," I said, keeping my voice neutral as I finally maneuvered past her. "Tonight?" she called after me, surprise evident in her tone. "He's requested you again? Interesting. I wonder what happens when he no longer needs his human pet." I quickened my pace, putting distance between us before my expression could betray how deeply her barbs had landed. By the time I reached my cabin, my hands were shaking from more than just physical exhaustion. The sanctuary of my small home welcomed me with blessed silence. I dropped my satchel on the table, too tired to properly unpack the plants I'd gathered. After stoking the fire to ward off the autumn chill, I collapsed onto my bed fully clothed, my grandmother's pendant still clutched in my palm. Sleep claimed me instantly, but brought no peace. My dreams were a chaotic blend of running through endless forests, steel-gray eyes watching from the shadows, and Darius's mocking smile as he circled closer and closer. I woke with a start hours later, heart pounding, to find afternoon light streaming through my window. I'd slept through the midday council meeting. Groaning, I sat up and ran a hand through my tangled hair, trying to shake off the lingering unease from my dreams. A knock at the door made me jump. I quickly smoothed my rumpled clothing and attempted to look somewhat presentable before opening it. Nora stood on my threshold, her expression a mixture of concern and excitement. "You missed everything," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "The council meeting, the announcement, all of it." "What announcement?" I asked, moving to heat water for tea while Nora paced my small living space. "Alpha Blackthorn has formally requested Moon River's assistance against what he's calling a growing threat to all packs. He's invoked the Ancient Alliance." I nearly dropped the kettle. The Ancient Alliance was rarely mentioned outside of historical texts, a pact between the original 5 great packs to unite against existential threats. That Blackthorn would invoke such a measure suggested something far more serious than boundary disputes. "Did he explain what this threat is?" I asked, setting 2 mugs on the table. Nora shook her head. "Not specifically, but Eden. He requested you by name." The mug slipped from my fingers, clattering against the wooden table. "Me? What could he possibly want with a human Omega?" "That's what everyone's wondering," Nora replied, leaning forward. "He said your knowledge of natural medicines and territory would be instrumental in what's to come. Elderstone couldn't refuse, not with the Ancient Alliance invoked." My mind raced, trying to make sense of this development. "So what happens now? You're to join Alpha Blackthorn's inner circle for the duration of the crisis. You'll travel with his pack when they return to Shadow Mountain territory after the Hunter's Moon. The room seemed to spin around me. Leave Moon River territory, travel to the northern mountains with wolves I barely knew. The notion was so foreign, so unexpected, that I couldn't immediately form a response. There's more, Nora continued, watching my reaction carefully. Red Claw has accused Moon River of harboring humans who use wolfsbane against shifters. They've demanded all humans be removed from pack protection or face consequences. That's absurd, I managed, finding my voice. Lily was gathering plants for healing. I was there last night. The meadow is clearly within our territory. This isn't about boundaries anymore, Eden, Nora said softly. It's about humans, about whether we belong in pack territories at all. The implication hung heavy between us. For generations, humans had lived among wolves, rarely as equals, but under protection nonetheless. My parents had been the exception rather than the rule, a mated pair where one shifted and one did not. After their deaths, I'd remained as the pack's only full-blooded human member, tolerated because of my family's standing and my useful knowledge of plants that wolves couldn't safely handle. If Red Claw succeeded in challenging human presence in wolf territories, where would that leave people like me? Like Lily and the handful of other humans who had married into packs? There's a theory circulating, Nora added hesitantly. Some believe Red Claw has aligned with rogue packs from the far north, packs that follow the old laws. The old laws. Even the phrase sent a chill through me. Centuries ago, before the modern pack system evolved, wolf society had operated under far harsher principles. Humans were property at best, prey at worst. The modern alliance system had evolved to create greater stability, allowing humans and wolves to coexist, if not as equals then at least without constant fear. That's why Alpha Blackthorn invoked the ancient alliance, I realized aloud. He believes Red Claw is trying to revert to the old laws. Nora nodded. And for some reason, he believes you're key to preventing it. I touched my pendant, seeking comfort in its familiar contours. My grandmother had warned me once that times of great change would come, that the balance between humans and wolves wasn't as stable as many believed. Had she somehow foreseen this? When do I leave? I asked, the reality of my situation slowly sinking in. After tonight's patrol, you'll have tomorrow to prepare, then depart with the Shadow Mountain pack at the Hunter's Moon. Nora reached across the table to squeeze my hand. I'll help you gather what you need. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Nora helped me identify which medicinal plants to bring, which books would be most valuable, what clothing would withstand the harsher northern climate. All the while, my mind struggled to process the drastic change in my circumstances. By the time evening approached and I prepared for the night's patrol, a strange calm had settled over me. Perhaps it was simply acceptance of what I couldn't control, or perhaps my grandmother's teaching about dignity in the face of uncertainty had finally taken root. The patrol gathered at the same meeting point as the previous night, though the composition had changed. More Shadow Mountain wolves were present, and Alpha Blackthorn's elite guards flanked him on either side. All eyes turned to me as I approached, expressions ranging from curiosity to outright suspicion. Alpha Blackthorn stepped forward, his imposing presence causing the others to fall back slightly. You've been informed of the Council's decision? Yes, Alpha, I replied, meeting his gaze directly. Though I confess, I don't understand why you've requested me specifically. Something like approval flickered in his steel eyes. Understanding will come. For tonight, we patrol the western border, the boundary shared with Silent Lake Pack. This surprised me. Silent Lake had been Moon River's most stable ally for generations. Their territory bordered our western edge, a relationship characterized by mutual respect and occasional trading. You anticipate trouble from Silent Lake? Marcus asked, voicing my own confusion. I anticipate nothing and prepare for everything, Alpha Blackthorn replied. Red Claw's actions suggest coordination with others. We will verify all borders. The patrol moved out, adopting the same protective formation around me as the previous night. As we traveled through the darkening forest, I found myself studying Alpha Blackthorn more carefully. What did he see when he looked at me? What value could a human possibly have in the coming conflict between wolves? We had traveled for perhaps an hour when Alpha Blackthorn suddenly raised his hand, signaling the patrol to halt. He scented the air, his powerful body going still with focused attention. The other wolves followed suit, tension radiating through their ranks. Unfamiliar wolves, he said quietly. Not Redclaw. Not Silent Lake. Marcus moved forward, confirming with his own senses. Rogues, perhaps? We've had reports of displaced wolves moving through unclaimed territories to the north. Perhaps, Alpha Blackthorn conceded, though his expression suggested he believed otherwise. He turned to me. Stay close. The patrol adjusted its formation, moving with greater stealth toward the source of the scents. We crested a small ridge that offered a view of the river marking Moon River's western boundary with Silent Lake territory. In the valley below, illuminated by moonlight, several figures moved along the riverbank. Even with my limited human vision, I could tell these weren't ordinary wolves. They moved with a strange, stilted coordination, as though their actions were choreographed. Several appeared to be placing objects at regular intervals along the water's edge. What are they doing? I whispered. Alpha Blackthorn's eyes narrowed as he studied the scene, marking territory, but not with traditional sense. He glanced at me. Can you identify what they're placing? I squinted, straining my human vision. The objects were small, pale against the dark earth. I'd need to get closer. For a moment, I thought he would refuse. The risk seemed unnecessary when Shadow Mountain and Moon River wolves could simply confront the trespassers directly. Instead, he nodded once and signaled to his guards. We approach from downwind. The human examines the markers while we create a diversion. The plan was quickly communicated through subtle gestures. 2 Moon River wolves would circle wide, creating a disturbance to draw attention away from the riverbank. Meanwhile, Alpha Blackthorn himself would accompany me to examine the markers, while his guards provided immediate protection. Everything happened with military precision. The diversion wolves howled from the far side of the valley, immediately drawing the attention of the strange wolves. As they moved to investigate, Alpha Blackthorn guided me swiftly down the ridge toward the riverbank, his hand at my elbow steadying me over the uneven ground. We reached the river's edge in moments. Up close, the markers were immediately identifiable and deeply troubling. Carved bone, I whispered, kneeling beside the nearest one. Human bone. Alpha Blackthorn's expression darkened as he surveyed the line of markers extending along the riverbank. A boundary claim under the old laws. They're declaring this territory governed by ancient rights. The implications chilled me to the core. Under the old laws, such markers signified that humans within the claimed territory were considered prey, not people. It was a direct challenge to the modern pack system that had evolved over centuries. We need to remove them, I said, already reaching for the nearest bone marker. No, Alpha Blackthorn caught my wrist, his grip firm but careful. Touching them would trigger an immediate challenge. We need to understand the full extent of this first. A sudden howl from above cut through the night, a warning from our lookouts. The strange wolves had detected our presence and were returning, fast. Time to leave, Alpha Blackthorn said, pulling me to my feet. Quietly now. We retreated up the ridge, rejoining the patrol just as the unknown wolves returned to the riverbank. From our concealed position, we observed them checking their markers before continuing their work, placing more bone stakes along the water's edge. They're mapping a claim around all of Moon River territory, Marcus whispered, horrified recognition in his voice. They're marking us for conquest. Alpha Blackthorn's face was grim as he signaled the patrol to withdraw. Not just Moon River, he said quietly. Every territory that follows the modern pack laws. This confirms what we've suspected in Shadow Mountain lands. As we moved silently back through the forest toward Packlands, the full weight of what we'd witnessed settled over me. The bone markers weren't just a territorial claim. They were a declaration of intent. A return to a time when humans had no rights or protections in wolf territories. Now I understood why Alpha Blackthorn had invoked the Ancient Alliance, and why perhaps he had taken such particular interest in me, a human who understood both worlds, who could identify threats others might miss. What I still couldn't fathom was what one human Omega could possibly do to stop the rising tide of an ancient, brutal ideology that threatened to sweep away everything the modern packs had built. Dawn was breaking when we returned to Moon River territory, the patrol moving with urgent purpose through the lightening forest. Alpha Blackthorn had dispatched runners ahead to alert Elderstone of our discoveries, ensuring the council would be assembled by our arrival. The main pavilion buzzed with tension as we entered. Elderstone sat in his ceremonial chair, flanked by pack leaders and elders. Their expressions grew grave as Alpha Blackthorn detailed what we had witnessed. The bone markers, the coordinated activity of unknown wolves, the clear invocation of old law symbols. This goes far beyond boundary disputes, he concluded, his powerful voice carrying to every corner of the gathering. This is a systematic attempt to revert territories to old law governance. Redclaw's aggression against humans is merely the first visible sign. Elderstone looked every one of his many years as he absorbed this information. You believe this movement has been building for some time? Shadow Mountain territories have seen similar markers appearing over the past 3 moons, Alpha Blackthorn confirmed. Always placed by wolves we cannot identify, rogues who leave no traceable scent. A murmur ran through the assembled wolves. Untraceable scents were rare and typically associated with dark magic, ancient practices largely abandoned by modern packs for their corrupting influence. What do they want? Marcus asked, his usual confidence shaken by the night's discovery. Alpha Blackthorn's gaze swept the gathering before settling briefly on me. A return to the old hierarchies. Wolves supreme, humans subjugated. The dissolution of mixed packs and human protections. But why now? Elderstone pressed. The modern pack system has maintained peace for generations. Peace brings its own discontent, Alpha Blackthorn replied. Especially among those who believe wolves have grown soft, that we've forgotten our true nature. His expression hardened. They call themselves the Purity Movement. Wolves who believe contact with humans weakens bloodlines, diminishes power. I felt eyes shifting toward me. The only full-blooded human in the pavilion. The weight of their stares made my skin prickle, but I kept my posture straight, my grandmother's teachings about dignity echoing in my mind. We've intercepted communications suggesting a coordinated effort to reclaim territories under old law governance before the Winter Summit, Alpha Blackthorn continued. Redclaw is merely one visible ally in a network that spans territories from the far north to the eastern mountains. How do we fight this? Marcus demanded. If they're using old magic to mask their scents, traditional patrols won't be enough. Alpha Blackthorn's response surprised everyone. We need knowledge they've forgotten, magic they've abandoned. His gaze settled on me once more. Human magic. The pavilion erupted in confused murmurs. Human magic was largely considered a myth by modern wolves. Old stories about ceremonies and earth bonds that predated wolf civilization. Elderstone raised a hand for silence. Explain, Alpha Blackthorn. The old laws drew power from blood and dominance, he said. But older still were the earth rituals practiced by humans before wolves claimed these territories. Rituals of protection and boundary setting that even ancient wolves respected. He gestured toward me. This is why I've requested Eden for the mission ahead. Her knowledge of plants, her connection to human traditions through her grandmother, these may provide the counter to old law magic. All eyes turned to me, expressions ranging from skepticism to dawning hope. I stood frozen, overwhelmed by the weight of expectation suddenly thrust upon me. I don't know any magic, I admitted, my voice smaller than I intended. My grandmother taught me about plants, about dignity, but not about ancient rituals. Alpha Blackthorn approached, stopping directly before me. Your grandmother's pendant, he said quietly. May I? Hesitantly, I lifted the stone from around my neck, placing it in his outstretched palm. He examined it carefully, turning the river quartz in the morning light. This is a boundary stone, he said after a moment, used in human protection rituals for centuries before wolves claimed these lands. Your grandmother knew exactly what she was giving you. I stared at the familiar pendant in disbelief. All these years, I'd thought it a simple keepsake, a physical reminder of her teachings. Could it really be something more significant? There are texts in Shadow Mountain's archives, Alpha Blackthorn continued, returning the pendant to me. Ancient records preserved from the time before the Great Packs formed. With these and your knowledge of the land's plants, we may be able to counter their boundary claims before they're fully established. Elderstone nodded slowly. Then it is decided. Eden will accompany the Shadow Mountain pack as planned. He turned to me, his aged eyes gentle despite the gravity of the situation. Child, Your path has never been easy among us. I fear it grows more difficult still." "I understand, Elder," I replied, drawing strength from somewhere deep within. "I'll do whatever I can to help." The meeting concluded with arrangements for my departure the following evening. As wolves dispersed to their duties, many with new urgency in their movements, Alpha Blackthorn remained at my side. "Walk with me," he said. Not a request, but not quite a command either. We left the pavilion together, drawing curious glances as we moved toward the quiet paths along the river. Neither of us spoke until we'd reached a secluded bend where the water pooled in a calm eddy, morning light dancing across its surface. "You have questions," Alpha Blackthorn stated, his penetrating gaze making evasion impossible. "Many," I admitted, "but most pressing. Why me? Surely there are humans with more knowledge of old rituals, with actual training in whatever magic you believe exists." "Perhaps." He studied the river's flow, "but none with your particular qualities." "Being an Omega is hardly a quality," I replied, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from my voice. Alpha Blackthorn turned to face me fully, his expression intense. "You misunderstand your position, Eden. You've never been an Omega in the true sense." This statement so contradicted everything I'd experienced in my life that I could only stare at him in confusion. "I'm human, incapable of shifting. By definition. By pack definition," he interrupted. "A narrow understanding based on physical transformation alone." He stepped closer. "True wolf hierarchy is based on spirit, on inner nature. Some who shift remain Omegas in spirit, submissive, seeking only to follow. Others," his gaze held mine, "others may never shift, yet carry the spirit of leadership within them." I shook my head, struggling to follow his reasoning. "I don't understand." "You stood against Darius at the ceremony when wolves with far higher rank remained silent," he reminded me. "You spoke at council when protocol demanded your silence. You protect others, Lily, your friend Nora, without thought to your own safety." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "These are not the actions of an Omega, regardless of your ability to shift form." His words stirred something within me, a recognition I'd buried beneath years of acceptance of my assigned place. Had I truly been stronger than I'd allowed myself to believe? "Even if what you say is true," I said carefully, "it doesn't explain why you need me specifically for this mission." Alpha Blackthorn was silent for a moment, seeming to weigh his next words. "There is a prophecy," he finally said, "recorded in Shadow Mountain's oldest texts. It speaks of a time when the old ways would rise again, when boundaries between wolf and human would be tested." His voice dropped lower. "It speaks of one who walks between worlds, human in form but wolf in spirit, who carries ancient protection in their blood." I stared at him, a chill running through me despite the morning sun. "You can't possibly believe that's me." When I first heard of Moon River's human Omega, who knew the forest better than born wolves, who worked with plants no shifter could touch, I was skeptical, he admitted. "But then I saw you at the claiming ceremony, standing your ground when every instinct should have told you to submit." His gaze intensified. "And your pendant. A boundary stone passed through your bloodline. These are not coincidences, Eden." My head spun with implications. All my life, I'd believed my human nature made me less in the wolf world, to consider that it might instead make me uniquely valuable, uniquely positioned to help in this crisis. It challenged everything I'd accepted about myself. "I don't know any protection rituals," I repeated, grasping at practical concerns to anchor myself. "You will learn," he replied with quiet certainty. "The knowledge is in Shadow Mountain's archives, and," he hesitated, "in your blood. Your grandmother knew more than she told you. I suspect she was preparing you in her way." The pendant felt suddenly heavier against my skin, as though acknowledging its true significance. I thought back to my grandmother's many teachings, her insistence that I learn every plant in the forest, her stories about the time before wolf packs claimed the territories. Had it all been preparation for this moment? "I need time to think," I said, overwhelmed by revelations that upended my understanding of my place in the world. Alpha Blackthorn nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Rest today. Prepare for our journey. We leave at moonrise tomorrow." He turned to go, then paused. "Eden." It was the first time he had used my name rather than my rank. The sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver through me. "The path ahead will not be easy," he continued, "but know this. In Shadow Mountain, you will not be Omega. You will be honored for what you are, not diminished for what you are not." With that promise hanging in the air between us, he left me by the river, my thoughts swirling like the eddies in the current below. I spent the day in a haze of preparation and contemplation. Nora helped me gather the last medicinal plants I might need, carefully packaging dried herbs and tinctures for the journey north. My small library of plant lore was bundled and secured for transport. Clothing suitable for the colder climate was packed in a leather travel sack. Through it all, my mind returned to Alpha Blackthorn's words by the river. Was it possible I had misunderstood my own nature all these years? That my human form was not the limitation I had believed, but something else entirely? As twilight approached, I found myself drawn to the small cemetery at the edge of Packlands, where my grandmother was buried. Her simple marker stood beneath an ancient oak, weathered by seasons yet still bearing her name clearly, Ilara Winters, Keeper of Boundaries. I had never given much thought to her epitaph before, assuming it referred to her role as mediator in pack disputes. Now, with Alpha Blackthorn's revelations fresh in my mind, I wondered if it held deeper significance. Kneeling beside her grave, I placed my palm against the cool stone. "Did you know?" I whispered. "Were you preparing me for this all along?" Only the gentle rustling of leaves answered, yet I felt a strange peace settle over me. Whatever lay ahead, I would face it with the quiet dignity she had taught me, not as the Omega I had believed myself to be, but as something else entirely, something I was only beginning to understand. The hunter's moon rose full and bright as I made my final preparations. A small contingent of Moon River wolves had gathered to witness our departure, their expressions solemn. Elderstone presented me with a formal scroll bearing the pack's seal, documentation of my status as Moon River's official emissary to Shadow Mountain. "Remember where you come from, child," he said quietly, his aged hands trembling slightly as he passed me the document. "Whatever you discover about yourself in the north, Moon River will always be your first home." I blinked back unexpected tears, touched by the formal acknowledgement that had been rare in my life within the pack. "Thank you, Elder." Alpha Blackthorn and his wolves waited at the northern boundary, their powerful forms silhouetted against the rising moon. As I approached, he stepped forward to meet me. "You're ready?" he asked, his steel gaze taking in my travel pack and the determined set of my shoulders. "Yes," I replied simply, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. He nodded once, then turned to address both his wolves and the Moon River witnesses. "Tonight we begin a journey that may reshape the future of all packs. The path ahead holds danger, but also the promise of a stronger alliance between wolves and humans. An alliance built on respect rather than dominance." His gaze found mine as he continued. "Some traditions deserve to be preserved. Others must evolve if we are to survive the challenges ahead. The old laws would have us believe strength comes only from subjugation. I believe true power emerges from unity, from recognizing the unique strengths of every pack member, whether they shift with the moon or stand in human form beneath it." A murmur ran through the gathered wolves. Not disagreement, but contemplation of ideas rarely expressed so directly by an alpha of his standing. Alpha Blackthorn extended his hand toward me, a gesture of partnership that sent another ripple of surprise through the witnesses. "Shall we begin?" Taking a deep breath, I placed my hand in his, feeling the controlled power in his grip as his fingers closed gently around mine. My grandmother's pendant seemed to warm against my skin, as though approving this moment of transformation. In that simple gesture, everything changed. I was no longer merely the human Omega who had never belonged. I was Eden Winters, possibly the boundary keeper my grandmother had been preparing me to become, embarking on a journey that might help save both wolves and humans from a threat rooted in the darkest parts of the past. As our small company turned north, the hunter's moon lighting our path through the ancient forest, I felt a strange sense of rightness settle over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't following or being tolerated. I was walking forward with purpose, my hand still held in the careful grip of an alpha who saw something in me that even I had never recognized. Whatever challenges lay ahead in Shadow Mountain territory, whatever ancient magic I might need to learn, I would face them not as the lowest-ranked pack member, but as someone with unique value and purpose. The poor Omega who had once bowed before the Howling pack had found her true strength, had been claimed not as a possession, but as an equal by the most powerful alpha in the north. And as the familiar forests of Moon River territory faded behind us, I realized that in losing what had always been my home, I might finally be finding where I truly belonged.